choice. But maybe Abraham learned something there, because right away there's another story, and this story is maybe one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I love this story. Abraham faces another threat to the promise. Okay? To the promise of offspring and land. Abraham faces another threat, but his response this time is very different. So what's the problem? In Genesis chapter 13. In verse 5 it says, now Lot, okay, Lot is Abraham's nephew, and he travels and he lives with Lot, and they're kind of combining their forces. And Lot was moving about with Abram, and Lot also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and the herders of Lot. So what's the problem? Okay, you've got both these men with their families, their servants, and their herds, and they're overwhelming the land. Okay? This is not sustainable. And it's leading to quarreling between Lot's men and Abram's men, and it's obvious that something has to give. This is unsustainable. So that's the problem. What's the solution? What does Abraham do in this instance when he faces this threat? Verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Abram says, Lot, we can't do this because this is causing strife in our relationship, and that's not good. I don't want that. We're family, but we can't keep doing this. So, Lot, listen, the whole land is before us. You decide where you want to go. Whatever direction you go in, I'll go in the other direction. And this is incredible because Abraham is the elder, right? I mean, especially, maybe today this wouldn't happen, right? You'd kick the old guy in the leg and run off and take what you wanted, right? You'd put the old guy in the nursing home and forget about him and take what you wanted. But back then, I mean, Abraham was the elder, okay? He had the right to take what he wanted and leave the rest to Lot. That was his right. He was the patriarch. He was the richer. He was the one with the promise of God. And it's incredible here that he gives Lot this decision. He says, Lot, you have first pick. And he knew what the land looked like. He knew over there in the east, he knew that was a wonderful land. It was the plain with the Jordan River. That was good soil, prosperous cities. I mean, that's where any herder would want to be. And he knew that the other direction, it was just kind of scrubby hills, the hilllands of Canaan. I mean, you could do it, but it's going to be hard. And he knows this is the choice before him, and he gives Lot first choice. Which is amazing, because he had three options. Abraham could have gone with Lot elsewhere. He could have said, listen, this land can't sustain us. Let's go to a different land. Let's go to a different land. That can sustain us together. But he knew this was the land of the promise. Right? This was the land that God had given him. So he wasn't going to do that. Another option was to take the good land for himself. He could just say, tough luck, Lot. I'm the older. I'm the one with the promise. I'm gonna pick where I want to go. And you can have the leftovers. He could have broken his relationship with Lot. He could have stepped on Lot to receive what he wanted, to try to cling to God's promise. Or he could have done what he did. He could have put himself in jeopardy. Which is what he does. He says, you pick whatever land you want. And Lot picks the obvious choice, right? I mean, Lot, geez, what are you going to do? Really, Abram? I got my pick, okay. I'm going over there. I'm going to the good land. Thanks. Thanks, Uncle. Abram's left with the not-so-great land. And he puts himself in jeopardy. Humanly speaking, he puts the promise in jeopardy, the promise of God's blessing. Here's a totally different Abraham than we had in Egypt, where he had to have a plan and he had to take control and take steps to secure, to protect the promise God had given him. Here's an Abraham that's not worried. Lot, listen, I don't want to step on you. You're my nephew, we're family. Listen, you go where you want to go, and I'll go the other way. Abraham's not worried. He's not taking control like he did in Egypt. He's giving up control. He's letting go. He's not protecting the promise. This Abraham doesn't feel like he needs to secure it for himself. God promised it, but I've got to secure it for myself. He doesn't do that. And he could have, but he doesn't. And look at God's response here in verse 14. So Lot went his way. Abram took the hill country of Canaan. And then we find in verse 14, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around, Abram, from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it all to you. You hear what God is saying? He says, Abram, after Lot's gone, Abram, look at it all. I'm giving it all to you. Everything you can see. Look in every direction. Just walk it. I am giving all of this land to you. In other words, what God is saying is, what you gave up, I will give you. Because I made the promise. And I will fulfill the promise. You don't have to cling to it. You don't have to strive to achieve it. You don't have to grip it. You don't have to step on people to make sure that you get God's blessing or you protect God's blessing. What you give up, I will give to you. And God reaffirms his promise and he intensifies it. Watchman Nee, the Chinese Christian author of last century, said it like this. He says, here is a most important lesson. We must learn to trust God to keep for us what he gives us, and must never seek to possess it by worldly means. Because we stand upon the earth for God, we are not therefore to become earthly. This land was God's gift to Abraham. To know this fact, and yet knowing it, to let it all go and leave the outcome to God. This is the work of the cross in a man. That's why I love this story. I mean, Abraham could have done like what he did in Egypt. No. God said, give it to me. And he could have figured out what he needed to do to make sure that he got what God said he would get. And instead he says, no. That's God's promise. It'll be his doing. And he lets it all go. And God gives it all to him in return. Watch what Watchman Nee is saying there is that those who are called by God have no need to protect their rights. You hear that? Those who are called by God have no need to protect their rights. They have no need to demand what is theirs. Because what God gives, he gives. What he promises, he fulfills. I wonder if Jesus had this story in mind in Matthew chapter 5. You know, this story, the Sermon on the Mount, where he goes through what we call the Beatitudes. Blessed is the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And then Jesus says, blessed are the meek. What's the promise to the meek? a very spiritual bunch. I thought maybe one or two of you might know this, but wow. Okay? Blessed are the meek. The meek will inherit the earth. Which is diametrically opposite from what we think the meek get. Right? No. It's the people that go out and claim it for themselves. The assertive ones. They're the ones that will get. What Jesus says is, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And I wonder if that's what Jesus had in mind. He's thinking back to the story of Abraham and Lot. When Abraham is meek, he defers. He defers not out of weakness. He defers out of strength. He defers out of faith in God's promise. I don't have to get it. I don't have to achieve it. God will give it to me. God will give it to me. What God has for me will be the blessing He has promised. That's not how we normally think of what it means to be meek, right? There was a guy who wrote a book named Cower Power, and he formed a group, a support group of submissive people, and he called it Doormats, which stands for Dependent Organization of Really Meek and Timid Souls. Apparently this is a real group, so if you want to join it, you're welcome to. Their motto was, the meek shall inherit the earth if that's okay with everybody. And their symbol was the yellow traffic light. Right? Meek and timid souls, as if those go together. As if those go together. A meek soul is not a timid soul. A meek soul is a strong soul. Jesus wasn't timid. Jesus was meek. He said He was meek. Because when people spat on Him, and when people mocked Him, He turned the other cheek. Because Jesus said, if someone wants you to go a mile with them, or carry their stuff for a mile, go with them another mile. If someone wants to take your tunic, give them your shirt. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. That's not a timid person. That's a strong person. That's a meek person. That doesn't have to claim or secure or protect blessing, but trust fully in God to give what God has promised. Right? Weakness requires strength. The Greek word for meek is the same word for a domesticated animal. Right? So it's like a wild animal that has been trained and tamed. Like I think, I'm not really a horse person, but I think a tame horse, I don't think, is any less strong than a wild horse. But its strength has been harnessed for its master. Right? It could do what a wild horse does. It could eat whatever it wants. It could run wherever it wants. But it submits its strength to the instruction and to the leading of its master. That's a meek animal. That only goes when the master prods him to go. That only eats what the master provides for him to eat. That's a meek animal. We are called, as Abraham is in this story, we are called to be strong in faith by being meek, by being totally under the control of God and not seizing control for ourselves because we feel like we need to do something to secure God's blessing or God's promises. So to be meek is to not seize control of the situation to ensure the desired outcome. And so I think this is just kind of my point here. Just Abraham didn't feel like he needed to seize it in order to have it. Right? He let it go, trusting that because God had promised it, God would give it. And God did. To be meek is to not seize control of the situation, to ensure the desired outcome, but to fully trust in God's working and to trust He is bringing about His promise and your good, and He doesn't need your help. Whether you see it in the moment or not, God is working to bring about His blessing and His promise in your life. This was the problem with the Galatian church. This is what Paul says to the Galatians, and he calls them fools. He says this in Galatians 3. He says, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by observing the law or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning with the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by human effort? Have you experienced so much in vain, if it really was in vain? Does God give you His Spirit and work miracles among you by your observing the law or by your believing what you heard? So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness." What he's saying is, listen, God called you by faith. You couldn't save yourself. You were totally inadequate. And God saved you. And He gave you His Spirit. And He gave you His promises. Don't now turn to your own efforts to try to achieve those things God has called you to. God will do those things in you if you walk by faith. And not work by your own strivings. He says it's God's initiative, it's not yours. Don't be a fool. So the question for us is the foundation of our peace our trying, or is it trusting in God? What's the foundation of our peace? Is it our striving? Or is it trusting in God? You know, it's... What did Abraham do? He failed so miserably, and then he hit it out of the ballpark. What did he do? Why the change? I think we have the answer here in the first verses. These are the few verses between the story, these two stories. It says, "So when Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him, he went to Negev, and from that place to the place, he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and there he had, where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord." Now, if you read the story, what you find is every step that Abram took out of the land into Egypt, he takes the exact opposite route. He goes from Egypt to the Negev. He goes from Negev to that place where he had first camped when he entered the land. That place between Bethel and Ai, where he first built that altar, where he first called on the name of the Lord. He went right back to that place, to that altar. And again it says, and he called on the name of the Lord. Whatever he did there made a total difference. He totally reset his understanding of his relationship with God and how this whole promise blessing thing worked. He retraces his step. I think it's a pilgrimage of repentance. And he comes and he resets his relationship with the Lord, and he centers himself on God's grace, and he says, "Lord, none of this was by me in the beginning. None of this was by me. You're the one that came to me. You're the one that gave me the promise. You're the one that showed me where to go every step of the way, and you led me to this land, right here where I built this altar, and a few months back, I called on your name. I'm coming back to you now, because I made a mess of things. I'm coming back now, and I want to be in that grace again. I don't want to feel like I have to cling or manufacture the outcome of these promises. I want to fully trust in you." That made all the difference. He came back to that place where he first called on the name of the Lord, first experienced God's grace, and he refocused himself. So as we close here, my question to you is there any way, if you have heard the call of God, and you answered the call of God, and you're a Christian who's called to walk by faith in Jesus Christ, is there any way in which you have reverted from faith in God's working to striving to claim something for yourself on God's behalf? Is there any way in which you have reverted from faith in God's working to do the work yourself in order to claim that which God has promised, in order to win the blessing for yourself? Is there an area of your life where you have grabbed the wheel from the Lord's hands and have taken control of the journey. So you get to that place where God promised you would get. If so, and I think about that, I would say this: God is gracious. You know, when you look at that account of when Abram went down into Egypt and he made a mess of things by concocting this plan, it says that when when Pharaoh gave his wife back to him, he also gave him flocks and wealth. And it's amazing to me, even in his messing up, God still blessed him, right? And he came back to the land of the promise richer. Not because of what he did, he messed up, but because God was going to fulfill his promise when he said, I will bless you. I will make your name great. I will make you a great nation. And God is gracious. He prospers Abraham even in his failing. And so it is with us. He can prosper us even in our failings. So my call to you, to all of us this morning, is to, if there's any way in which you've left that place of grace, of just fully resting in God's working, and you've left that place of grace to do something in your own strength, in your own wisdom, to help God out. The call of God this morning is to return to that altar of God's grace, to consider God's call again, to consider the nature of our relationship, to reconsider God's promise that He is the one that will do it. We just have to walk in faith, to return to that place and again worship God, call upon the name of the Lord, and fully relinquish control of our lives and all our circumstances into His hands. And simply walk by faith. Let's pray. Lord, I don't know why you called me, and I don't know why you called these people. You're still calling people in this world. And I know it's not because of who we are. We're no better, Lord, but for your purposes, you have called us. And you have given us your Son, Jesus, and asked us to turn from our ways and to turn from our doings and to trust in Jesus' doings and to walk by faith in Him. I thank you, Father, that that's your call, that you're the one that achieves your blessings and promises, that we are totally free from the need and the impulse to have to try to achieve it on our own strength, with our own wisdom. Lord, but that we can go through this life being meek, not having to strive, not having to cling, not having to step over somebody else to try to take something that is your blessing, or to secure your blessing, Father, but that we can just fully relinquish all of that into your hands, because you are a gracious God, and because you have called us, you will fulfill the call.